Hey everybody, welcome to ARodesky Genealogy. In today's episode, you're going to hear from Linda Biggs. She's a local resident here in Middletown, and I was lucky enough to be able to do the research on her family. So she's going to share with you some of the things that she learned about her family. Everybody, I want to introduce you to Linda Biggs. Linda lives here in Middletown, Delaware, and she recently, not that long ago, Linda, how long ago was it?
It's been a couple years.
A couple years ago, she had some research done on her family history, and she has a lot of interesting ancestors and a lot of interesting members in her family, and I thought you guys would find this very interesting, and Linda said she'd be more than willing to share some of this with you. So, Linda, thank you for doing this with me today. So, Linda, you learned some interesting things about your family surname. So what have you learned about your family surname?
Maiden name was Lockwood. And actually there was a coat of arms.
Okay.
And it says what the coat of arms meant, and I forget. I can look it up in my book. Something about near the water, something about the water. Because I always thought Lockwood, something about Lockwood, the woods or something. I don't know. So I don't really know what Lockwood means. Okay. But as it went back in England, some of them were de Lockwood, and it was like the first names were French. So I'm thinking, did they migrate from France to England?
Okay.
But as far back as we went to the 1400s, they were all in England, but they had different names that made me think of French. Okay. So I don't know what Lockwood means, the significance.
Okay.
I haven't really learned that.
That's okay. That's a lot of us don't know what it means.
Yeah.
What our surnames mean.
Yeah.
That's one of the other fun things that you get time to look at and research at some point. You can find out a little bit more about the Lockwood name. So let's go ahead. Let's get started on what you found out about your family and the research that was done. So was there anything that shocked you, that was surprising, that you didn't know about, that you learned in the research?
Well, I learned a lot of things. I had no idea that I have roots in the Middletown area. I grew up in Cecil County, and Middletown was just Middletown, Delaware. I had no knowledge of my roots here. So after you doing the research, my goodness, this is the big base. I've learned so much about Richard Lockwood, who was in the town, and he was my great-grandfather, fourth time.
Your fourth-time great-grandfather.
Fourth-time grandfather. But the significance of him in the community, the big house on the corner was his, and he had a store there, and he owned lots and lots of farmland in around Middletown and Cecil County, Maryland. And as we went back, my goodness, Noxon Town, we all know Noxon Town and the mill.
Yeah, the Noxon Town mill.
Yeah, my ancestors were Noxons. I had no idea the connection, and then you made me aware of the cemetery. I go out there, and on the old St. Anne's Church on the corner is the vestryman Richard Lockwood, and there are the graves. I found several Lockwood graves. It's like I just had no idea there were roots here.
The strong roots here. Now, full disclosure, something I didn't mention earlier. Linda, she keeps talking about the research that was done and was referring to me. I did do Linda's research that she's speaking about, that she's talking to you guys about today. So,
and I'm so grateful that she did, because I knew none of this. It's just wonderful learning all of this.
It is fun.
And now that I'm retired, I just recently retired, so now I really want to do more.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. You made me aware of a book.
Okay.
And I found it online, and I've ordered it. It should be here next week.
What was the book?
It's the history, the Lockwood history, colonial, and the history of the Lockwood family from 1630 in America.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So you were able to find that online.
Yes, there was one.
So when you hear you need to get the book, check to see how many are left, because she got the last one, obviously, on this one.
Amazon, it says one left.
So you have that book coming. So that book's going to give you some additional information on the Lockwood family line, on the surname Lockwood. So I know there were some other interesting things that you learned also?
I was
about?
disappointed to learn that many of my ancestors had slaves.
Okay. All right,
I was wishing that they had been abolitionists and
right.
Quakers. I did see some Quaker names way back, so I'm hoping they were, because that disappointed me.
Where were those
I often
families?
think I wish I could have gone back to meet them. Now I feel like, I wish I knew them all.
Yeah.
But yet I wouldn't want to have been a part of slavery.
Right. No.
That disappointed me, because in the Middletown area,
Right.
different of the families, the Lockwoods, the Naldanes, the Noxons,
Right. They had slaves.
mm-hmm.
Well, and one thing to always remember, and I think I told you, and if you guys have seen any of the stuff that I've written or have said before, there are ancestors. There are family members. That's our lineage. We don't have to agree with what it is that they did,
Mm-hmm.
but that's part of history.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that you can do and that everyone should do is learn from the history, learn from the mistakes that were made, learn from what was done. And
my husband and I talk about it. He says, okay, so if you were back then, what would you have done? And it's like, I know I would have been an active.
That's a good question. What would,
but
yeah, what would you
in
do?
that, but the women in that time, many of them weren't even educated, and they couldn't vote and they couldn't do. But I was talking to someone recently, and she said, from all the research she had done, most of the slave owners in this area treated their slaves with dignity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how true that is, but that gives you a little. Hopefully they did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's usually something when you do
Yeah.
your research and you learn that is one of those sad,
Mm-hmm.
depressing things that many of us don't want to find.
I guess that's the only
all.
thing I found out that was disappointing.
Right.
It was nice to see that they were educated. Several of them are very well educated, successful. And like I said, 1630 is when they first came to America.
Okay.
And they settled in Watertown, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And eventually, several of them migrated to Connecticut, to the Fairfield area, and then on down to the Eastern Shore. It was Somerset, Wacomico County, Maryland. So I'm thinking waterway. I don't know what brought them there. I'm curious as to what brought them from England, then what brought them down there, and then up to Dover, and then from Dover to the Middletown area. And more recently, my father, grandfather, were born Kent County, Maryland.
Okay.
There's a lot of Kent County, Maryland heritage there, Kent County, Delaware.
There's a lot of Middletown, Kent County connections.
Mm-hmm.
that
And
go
back
through
in
there.
time, Maryland and Delaware were kind of one.
That's
before-
true, yes.
Before William, there was an ancestor whose daughter,
Oh,
was related to, of William Penn's
William-
daughter or sister-in-law.
there was a sister-in-law
Sister-in-law,
connection. There was a
'cause there was
sister-in-law
a
connection
house.
to William Penn.
Yeah. 'cause
Oh, the
it's
house that was willed to
to
her?
her because
Right.
she was a sister-in-law. to
And this is
William
all
Penn.
in your family. And this
Yes,
is everything that you didn't know.
I
So
had no idea.
if you guys have not done any type of research, you can do the research on your own family history research, or you're a genealogist, or you know a genealogist to do your research. Look at the wonderful things that you can learn about your family that you didn't even know about. Linda didn't even know she had an actual connection to Middletown,
Exactly.
the town that she's in
Then
right
now,
now.
the circle came around.
It all comes around. It all comes around. So, do you know, trying to recall on some of the research was done, was there any of the, peach, peaches were a big thing here in Middletown. Was there a connection with the peaches within your family?
The Lockwood, yes.
Okay.
Connection one, the merchant.
The merchant, okay, that's
Yeah,
right.
there was Richard and John Jr. and Earl, my grandfather, and Robert. But yeah, they were connected, the local ones, with the peach industry and the transporting to England peaches.
That's right. Wasn't one of them the first one to
John
develop the
Jr.
refrigerator to keep the peaches cool?
Yes, there was a document that you found.
Right.
Where
he had thought of the idea that when transporting the peaches, when it was during the hot summertime,
Mhm.
the hot months, one of the things was to keep them cool. So
Right.
he had developed some type of device to help keep the peaches cool when they were being transported.
Mhm.
I do remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so much on the Lockwoods, my family. Now, interestingly, my grandmother was a king, one of my grandmothers, and going back through them, they've been in the country a long, long time too, and
Right.
to the Newcastle, Wilmington area, and King was at one point Deconig.
Okay. Yes.
And so they came from Belgium, Netherlands, and I recently had my DNA. I did it. It was awesome.
You did your DNA test.
29% Irish, 28% English, Irish, Scotch, 17% Scandinavia, and 11% Western European, and then trickled down. But I'm thinking Scandinavia. So then I, get my map again. Well, Denmark was part of Scandinavia, because I'm thinking I never knew of anything about Norway or Sweden. But so that Deconig, I guess,
Was from
sounds they came from the Netherlands and Belgium
Okay.
through the research done. And at some point they changed it down to King.
So your DNA matched the research that was done.
Mhm.
So that's always good.
Yeah.
We like that.
Well, I did
that's
find
good.
out, and
Uh-huh.
I kind of figured this out before because of the last names. Grandfather named Newnam on my mother's side. On my father's side, a great-grandmother named Newnam. So through the research, great-grandfather, great-grandmother were brother and sister.
And that, when you were talking about everything comes
That's
around
Kent
full
County.
circle, that's a whole circle.
That's
family
Kent
circle.
County,
That's
Maryland.
That's Kent-
Wow. So we're 3 generations removed. I guess I'm okay.
You're good. Perfectly fine. That's another one of those things when doing research, when you're doing your research and you find that in there, you're like, oh no. But it wasn't that uncommon to see that or to hear of that.
Mm-hmm. And there was 2 brothers were married. The brother married the wife. They had children, but then he died, so she married his brother.
His brother, right? And
Newnam.
that was very common to have that done.
Yeah.
To see that when you're in your family line, in your research that's done. Now, we talked about the peaches, and we talked about where they migrated from, and their path from Massachusetts down into Dover, and then to Middletown and Maryland and Kent County. There was some really other interesting occupations that you had in your family also, and some of them you were really surprised to find out about, and some of you might even be surprised to find this too. If any of you have read Moby Dick, you'll definitely want to listen up to this because she has a connection to a character in Moby Dick. And who was this individual?
My goodness. He was the professor in the book. And I have a cousin, Henry Hayes Lockwood, who was one of the founders of the Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Yes.
He was also in the Civil War. Well, he was a good friend of the author of Moby Dick. And so he created this character after Henry Hayes Lockwood.
My cousin. How about that? If you've read Moby Dick and you come across the professor, that's her relative.
I wish I could meet him.
Now, he was the founder of the Naval Academy.
One of the founders.
And he had quite a few jobs, if I remember correctly, as being connected with the Naval Academy and his military career.
Right. He also was an instructor there. He taught at the Naval Academy. There's a monument to this Henry Hayes Lockwood at Gettysburg. He had led a brigade there. And just wish I could go back and meet these people. And the researching the records, the census and different things, it was interesting because a lot of times there's so many farmers in my history because it was an agrarian culture then.
Right.
But so many farmers, but some of them were gentleman farmer and others were farmer, and then it would be wife for the wife, but some were lady of the house.
Where they're at, their
Status.
status in the community, yes. Yes, if you were a lady at the house, chances are you weren't out picking cucumbers out in the, or picking peaches.
So I wonder if the gentleman farmer did much labor.
I'm curious, you refer to that, and I am trying to remember, and I cannot remember.
It was John Jackson Lockwood, so it would be, yeah, I don't know, but I guess he was a wealthy landowner then, and I guess he had people do his work.
Okay. Was he one that had slaves?
His father did.
His father did.
And I don't know if he did too at that point. Probably because that was before the Civil War. That was in the 1700s.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember because, like I said, it's been years since
I have an ancestor. There's lots of Richards. It's almost like they'd have a Richard, then they'd name him after his grandfather.
They have it.
skip.
Yeah.
But in Dover, the Richard Lockwood met in Newcastle after the Continental Convention in Philly, where they independence.
Right.
So he met in Newcastle with the group to form a government for Delaware.
So you have an ancestor that was
He met in Newcastle.
In Newcastle, and was on the planning to help develop the
state of government, Delaware's government, after they declared their independence from England.
And you didn't know any of this until the research was done. There's a testament to you guys need to do your
really
research.
It's just fabulous. It's just wonderful to know all this.
And now that you know this and know all of the information, have you traveled around to go back to any of these locations where these family members were at, or
gone to cemeteries?
You've gone to cemeteries.
Gone to cemeteries. I have ancestors that came from Ireland. On my mother's side, O'Neill.
Okay.
And of course, interesting, the spelling changed. Originally it was O-N-E-I-L-L, then it became O-N-E-L. But we've gone to the cemeteries. Some of them had unmarked graves.
Okay.
So I know the cemetery, but I don't know. And they didn't come over until the mid-1800s.
Okay.
That seems so recent compared to the Lockwoods and the Kings.
But yeah. So you've gone to some of the cemeteries and seen and visited where some of them, both your maternal and paternal side.
There's Middletown, Lockwood, then down in Crumpton, Maryland. Like I said, Kent County, Maryland. There's a lot down there, Crumpton, and they're just old cemeteries. Lamson Cemetery, below Galena, it belonged to the Catholic Church. So that was the Irish side, the O'Neills.
Okay.
Now he migrated from Pittsburgh. His father, I think, his grandfather came from Ireland, but Pittsburgh, and then ended up in Maryland.
Okay.
Kent County, Cecil County, Maryland. And I found some pictures.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Of it. There's no date, but it must be the late 1800s because it's on the O'Neill side. My great-grandmother, Teresa Emma George, and Nicholas George. She came from Switzerland and he came from France.
Okay.
Because he was in the Prussian army.
Okay.
So he was between Prussia and on the eastern side. But they came from to America. And there's a picture of him and her, and standing behind them is my grandmother. Her name was Teresa Emma O'Neill, but I remember my mom saying her papa always called her Tessie.
Tessie. I love that, Tessie. I love
Tessie.
that, Tessie.
Yeah.
That is.
So there's a picture, and she's, they look so serious, but.
Now, when did you find the picture? Did you find it before or after your research was done?
I found it afterwards.
You found it afterwards?
Yeah, and I don't know. It's online now on Ancestry.
So after all of your research, after you received everything, you started to do.
Yeah, started to look. Yeah. You found a picture of this Richard Lockwood for me, and I still have. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And it's so wonderful to look at because it's like, well, I can see my dad in him, even though it's 4 generations.
The characteristics go on and on. They continue. Well, I love that you have continue taking on the research and continue, learning more about your family and your ancestors and where they came from. That's the whole reason that I do what I do, and I know that a lot of people do research, whether they do it professionally or they do it as a hobby. It's just to be able to discover more about where we came from.
It is.
Who we all
Roots,
are.
our roots.
Our roots. Who are we?
Yeah. And they were three-dimensional. They're more three-dimensional now, knowing
Right.
this, their history.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, it's just would have been nice to meet them and know them.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Wow. Hard work. I now that I'm getting older too, I look to see how old they were, how long they lived.
Right.
And there's several back in the 1700s and early 1800s that lived to be in their 80s, 70s, which was wonderful.
Right. Oh, yeah, that
For
was
that
good.
time, because like 45, was probably about the average
really,
lifespan.
yeah.
And some died younger. Oh, one interesting thing
Uh-huh.
I forgot to mention, as
Okay.
you research back,
Uh-huh.
in the 1400s, I had a relative who was the Lord Mayor of London.
I was wondering if you were going to. I
forgot that.
kept thinking. I was trying to remember
Yeah, the Lord Mayor of London.
Yes, yeah. One of the things that I forgot to mention was I did Linda's research, and I also did her husband's. So some of it, as we're sitting here talking, a lot of the research that was done, it's coming back to me, and I'm starting to remember what you're mentioning, the names and the
Cochrane,
locations, Cochrane, Biggs, and Lockwood, and so I was trying to remember if it was your line that had that connection
Or his.
or his. I could not remember. So go on ahead.
Yeah, so the Lord Mayor of London. And I was just connecting the dots yesterday, looking back. He, his wife, and I think it was their daughter, they all died the same year, the same month. So I'm thinking, back in history, was there a plague? Did they have the flu back then? It must have been.
There were different
Wonder
illnesses,
what-
plagues.
Wonder, yeah.
I mean, you've been you're in the medical field,
Mhm.
so you know. I mean, during that time, science, what we have now medically, we're able to
Exactly.
do.
So I
unbelievable
just thought
things
that yesterday.
within.
Oh my goodness, the same year, the same month, they must have had an illness.
There could have been an illness I don't remember now. I'm trying to.
I don't know either from the 1400s.
I mean, there could have been a number of.
Well, you mentioned my husband. And
Yes.
And it's amazing, but his family has huge Middletown roots. So I just found a map of 1858, and I bought it. It hasn't come yet.
Oh.
But it's of Cecil County, Maryland.
Mhm.
And it has the names of the residents in the areas. Well, outside of Warwick, there was the Lockwood Farm, and right down the road was the Biggs Farm. And I said, "Oh my gosh, honey, look,
You were neighbors back then. Who knew? And he didn't know a whole lot about his
No,
family line
no.
either. So when the research was done on both of them, I was pleased. I mean, pleased as punch, I guess you could say, that I was able to let you guys know you had more of a connection to Middletown than you even
I had
thought.
I had no idea.
And then to find out you guys had neighbors, family members were neighbors. Yeah.
Well, the sad thing with the Richard Lockwood that lived here in town, he had married, I think it was Mary Rothwell. Very wealthy family. Lots of farmland. He took on a partner in his mercantile business who wiped him out financially.
Yes.
And he lost all that. And he was fortunate enough that his wife had had all this farmland, so then he had the farmland.
Right. Rothwell's is another very well-known name here in this area.
Naldane.
Naldane, yes. A lot of them. So let me ask this. In the research that was done, and you've learned about some of your ancestors, if you could pick one ancestor that you would want to, okay, I'll make it a little easier, okay, because one is kind of hard to pick just one. If you could pick 3 ancestors you could sit down and have coffee, tea, or dinner with, who would they be?
Oh my gosh.
You guys think about the same thing too. Who would you pick?
I feel like I would want to meet the Richard Lockwood, but I would want to meet his wife too, 2 of them, because they kind of were the foundation of the Middletown area. Being a female, I would love to meet Mary Noxon, the daughter of Benjamin Noxon.
Right.
just to see what it was like from her perspective.
Right.
I'd like to know the woman's perspective from back then.
That's a good, yeah. That would be nice to know. I mean, because not everything.
Because you hear so much about the men.
Right.
And the women, some of them couldn't read.
True.
They weren't schooled.
Right. No,
so
and they were.
There's so many I would love to meet. There's so many. But yeah, I guess those would be the three.
Those would be the three. I think those are three good choices, and I like the reasoning behind it, especially meeting with the husband and the wife and being able to talk with her and find out what it was like at that time.
Right.
For her.
And they had slaves. Did she cook? What did she do? I don't know. A lot of needlework.
Right.
Raising children.
Now,
and
Linda, thank you so much for taking time to do this. I appreciate this. This was so much fun. I love it. Thank you.
So it was fun.
I'm so glad you did it. I'm so glad you've enjoyed all of the information and research that was done, and you have enjoyed reading over it, found it useful, and you continue to learn more. Because there's just so much more.
It is so wonderful. It's just enriched my life.
That is good. I am so glad. I am so glad.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and got to learn a little bit more about Middletown, some of the names here in Middletown, and the things that Linda shared with you, and the excitement that you can find in doing your family research. So leave me a few comments down below. Let me know what you think. Throw me a thumbs up. And don't forget to keep unlocking those family stories.